Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com. Now, in today's podcast, I wanted to cover some interesting news about the Big Four accounting firms and U.S. tax law. So, Senator Elizabeth Warren and United States Representative Pramila Jayapal are going to be calling leaders of 5 major accounting firms, Deloitte, PwC, EY, KPMG, and RSM, to testify in front of them. And it's kind of weird that RSM is in there, and the reason RSM is in there is because they were featured in a New York Times article that came out a month ago talking about how there's a revolving door between the Big Four accounting firms and the IRS and the Treasury Department of the U.S. And once they're Treasury officials, they help the representatives of the U.S. write tax law and theoretically help them avoid taxes. Or, I mean, the way that it's being portrayed by Elizabeth Warren is that it just allows them to completely avoid taxes. And I'm sure there are structures that help these companies really avoid the taxes. So I get it from that perspective, but singling out the big accounting firms and RSM, I don't think is really going to prevent anything. But also what was interesting about that New York Times article was it had a lot of detailed information that I don't think the person from New York Times pulled themselves. I think there was some insider or multiple insiders of the big four accounting firms maybe officials in the administration of the government that didn't like what was happening and compiled this list of people that have gone back and forth and provided it to the New York Times reporter. But also there's a lot of people on there. There's a lot of big names missing from there as well, from that New York Times report. And that's why I think that I don't think it was the person doing the research themselves, but I also don't think it was that the person who gave them the information knew everything either, because there's a lot higher up officials than they had in there too that have gone back and forth between the big four accounting firms. They picked and chose very particular stories versus actually focusing on extremely high ranking officials that have worked at the big four accounting firms. And specifically of PwC as well as, PwC and EY, because that's another thing that article focused on, is that Mark Weinberger, who used to be EY CEO, basically was one of the first people that did this back and forth thing between the big four accounting firms and the Treasury Department. So they missed, they didn't miss him, but they missed some other extremely high level officials that have gone back and forth. So I think that story was planted there. And I think it's also because I think Elizabeth Warren and Pramila Jayapal want to pass some legislation. They obviously want to increase taxes, but then they want these large companies to quote unquote pay their fair share. And what it would do, the legislation would require executive branch employees to recuse themselves from matters that might financially benefit their immediately prior employers, which in this case, the Treasury is under the executive branch. So that's how that would work. And it would prevent them from going back and forth. And the article said that a lot of times the people will just go to work for the Treasury for a couple of years and then go right back and they'll become partner. This episode is brought to you by Boomer. Boomer helps you ace the interview at the big four accounting firms, and it does this by helping you practice on questions typically asked on the big four interview. And if you use the link or promo code which goes to tryvoomer.com/big4, or the promo code BIG4, then listeners get 10% off their purchase. So go ahead and check out their website, tryvoomer.com, and see if you like all the tools they have that can help you prep for your Big Four interview, and you do choose to purchase it. Make sure to use the link in the show notes, because with that link, you're going to get 10% off, or make sure to use our promo code. All the details are in the show notes. I think it's very confusing, and it's just additional regulation for the big four accounting firms, because The big four accounting firms have the largest clients in the world. If they are not involved in making policy at all, then it's going to be pretty difficult to make any policy because a lot of Congress aren't accountants and they don't understand accounting. They don't understand tax implications. And the big four accounting firms are filled with smart people that work with the large companies. So they're going to be able to avoid taxes even easier. But also just in general, uh, the federal government and just governments in general, there's a revolving door, not only at the accounting firms, but in law firms, in consulting firms. And once people leave Congress, they start their own lobbying firms. There's just so many revolving doors, and this is another one. And focusing on the big four accounting firms, I'm not really sure how they're going to stop this either, because there has to be a dialogue between the Treasury and the big four accounting firms, because a lot of times they'll write regulations that don't make any sense. And people at the big four accounting firms and clients have to reach out and get guidance. There's a lot of conferences that happen where both sides talk to each other. So I understand what they're trying to do here, but there's already tons of regulation in this area of the big four accounting firms and influencing government, because that does happen around the world with the big four accounting firms, and they get in trouble with it all the time. So there's tons of regulation, and they can create as much as they want. But if they're good at avoiding, according to these people, according to Elizabeth Warren, at avoiding tax law, then they're also going to be good at avoiding, your anti-corruption law, finding ways around it. So I think it's interesting. It does not amaze me that this is happening, because the big four accounting firms were pretty blatant with this, and it is pretty lucrative if you go into the IRS or Treasury and get a high position and come back. But it's also, but the article doesn't really say, it's really hard to do that. You have to be good to begin with to get a high position. You have to be well connected, and that's just business and government policy in general, as people are already well connected. So you can't really prevent people from being well connected. But another thing is just another area of regulation for the big four accounting firms. We see it all the time. They're connected to the largest companies in the world. PwC's revenue report said that they have clients of 84% of the top 500 companies in the world. So when you're close to the largest companies in the world and you make all this money, you're always going to face scrutiny from lawmakers, but also just additional regulations. And I would be interested in seeing how they respond to this. They did not respond to that New York Times article, but it's going to be interesting to see how they respond to it. They need to push back, because I don't think additional regulation is going to solve this. It's just going to make another obstacle for the big four accounting firms to trip over, more penalties for them, and it's only going to impact staff people. They need to Congress needs to draft better laws, and then Congress is on both sides of this, because they're getting lobbied for these regulations. They're not innocent. I mean, they see that Facebook, Amazon, and these are the people that pay for their elections as well. They're lobbying for these tax cuts and these tax structures. So they're pretending like they're ignorant to that, but they're not. And it's really the law that's going to determine whether a company avoids taxes. It's not the big four accounting firms. People are in the government are very knowledgeable. It's not only these few people moving back and forth between the big four accounting firms. So I think the big four accounting firms, when they respond, when they speak to Congress and the Senate, they need to push back to avoid further regulation, because it's the only thing it's going to do is just mean more compliance for the big four accounting firms whenever they're starting an engagement. It's going to mean more training for staff people, and it's just more hours wasted on admin, and there's already too much time that's wasted at the big four accounting firms. That's the podcast for today. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast to get future updates, and check out the show notes for helpful links. Thanks for listening.